Well, it is Tuesday here on your Feel Good Breakfast Show. Well, it's Tuesday everywhere if you're tuning in today. But today's one of those days where we like to delve into our relationships. And we give dilemmas and scenarios, and we have one that we would like to share with you this morning. Now, this is the dilemma. As I was dealing with my own struggles with substance abuse, the last thing I expected was to find out about my wife's affair. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Now, in the aftermath of the betrayal, she's coming to me asking for forgiveness and trying to blame my addiction for everything wrong in our marriage. It's a total whirlwind of emotions, confusion, hurt, you name it. I'm stuck between wanting to mend things and feeling the sting of her betrayal. It's like my heart's pulled in a million directions and I'm just trying to figure out which way to go. So that is our scenario for today. And joining us to help us discuss and unpack this more and also share professional advice is mental health counsellor Danelle Mayo, who is here joining us today. It's so great to have you joining us.
Good morning, Danelle. Sure, what a scenario slash dilemma. There's so many layers to this. I mean, you can't actually look at it only from one side. You know what I'm saying? I think there's a lot going on. But first, let's start at the beginning. Substance abuse.
Yeah.
We know how detrimental that can be to any, even a healthy relationship.
Yes.
But how would you say, in your professional opinion, does substance abuse affect a relationship?
Yeah. Well, when we think about relationships in general, some relationships can be difficult to navigate. But I think when we look at substance abuse and addiction, it adds that extra layer of difficulty and can bring about challenges. And it's because, you know, when it comes to addiction, it can elicit or cause a lot of negative behaviors that can bring up conflicts within a relationship or within a marriage. So it adds that layer of difficulty. It can cause a lot of mistrust, lack of transparency, and really the non-addiction partner can be left feeling confused.
But that's
as
exactly
Zoe
it.
mentioned.
Yeah. So what impact would substance abuse in this case have in a relationship that's already hanging by a thread?
Yeah, so if we look at this situation specifically, I mean, it already sounds like there's a lot of undercurrents, a lot of toxic relationship dynamics. And so, you know, I think it adds that extra layer of really feeling sort of self-isolated within the relationship. And there is that fear of rejection there. And I think a lot of times when it comes to addiction within a relationship, the partner can feel that, look, you're not prioritizing the relationship. We're now magnifying a lot of these unhealthy coping mechanisms, and the addiction itself starts to take over the relationship.
We're looking at this scenario, and on one end, we're dealing with substance abuse, which is already putting a lot of pressure on the relationship. And then there's the infidelity part on the partner. And this is interesting because it doesn't specify, obviously, how long it's been going on. The infidelity part, was it in part caused by the difficulties because of the substance abuse? I mean, there's so many, that's what I'm saying, there's so many different scenarios. But I mean, if you look at a relationship in a whole, like you've said, I mean, yes, it's difficult, but now you have the substance part, right? And the abuse part and the addictive side, which puts a lot of pressure on the partner itself. And if it prolongs, I mean, would you say, in your professional opinion, this is, I mean, the dangers are very real, that something like an infidelity can happen because that partner just does not know how to handle things?
Yeah, I think, you know, like I mentioned, you can start to feel isolated in the relationship just because you don't really feel that emotional security now, because of the mistrust and because of the ongoing challenges with the addiction and how that sort of plays into the relationship. And I think, you know, long term, that can have very damaging effects on the relationship itself, particularly for the partner that's, I suppose, trying to best support you know, the partner that's struggling with addiction, struggling with substance abuse. And oftentimes it's because it feels as though we've kind of exhausted all avenues.
It's now lost,
Yeah, and now we're exploring these other, you know, unhealthy outlets and ways to kind of cope ourselves in that situation.
It was difficult.
Yeah.
Am I the only one that understood that scenario as the person who was doing the substance abuse is playing the victim in his own scenario? Is that normal for someone that, you know, perhaps has played their part to now play the victim?
Yes, oftentimes that can happen, especially in cases like this where, you know, perhaps it's been something that's been very normalized for them, a coping tool that's been very normalized for them. And I think over time, you know, we need to look into accountability and actually seeking that professional help when it comes to substance and addiction. But definitely in this case, particularly, it's so multi-layered, so multifaceted that on the one hand, I understand when she's saying, you know, look, a lot of the problems that came up or the conflicts that came up in the marriage was a result of, you know, how we're trying to navigate the addiction. And perhaps he might be in a place where he was battling with recovery, he was battling, overcoming those challenges. And so, yeah,
because you look at these two aspects, the addiction side and the infidelity side, and you can't really say which one is worse. You know what I'm saying? Because equally, they are, for me, up in that same level. But I want to talk about addiction first, because obviously I think in this scenario, that's where it kind of all started. And there's many forms of addiction. What leads to addiction for some people? Because not everyone.
Yeah, so when we look at substance in general, it's an excessive use of either drugs or alcohol, prescription meds that can lead to very, you know, damaging...
Can be addicted to love.
Yes, exactly. But I think there's a lot that plays into it in terms of the causes. So we could have, you know, genetic predispositions, meaning your family history that could give you a higher risk. We also have environmental factors that could come into play, i.e. what you might have been exposed to, what might have been normalized for you, and just general life stresses. Especially those that struggle with mental health disorders, there is a likelihood that perhaps they may lean into substance and addiction.
Grasp at something that makes them feel.
Absolutely, So, you know, for some people, that becomes an outlet, that becomes a coping tool for them.
Okay. Well, Danelle, we don't want you to go anywhere, so stay tuned. Stay with us. Perhaps you want to join the conversation. Let us know your thoughts. What, you know, perhaps you have found yourself in a similar situation, or perhaps you know someone in that situation. You're welcome to join the conversation by heading over to our social media pages at Expresso Show and let us know. You're welcome to also send us a voice note. Our number is 063-408-8863. Danelle is here and she's got loads of professional opinion, so perhaps you even have a question for her.
I would love to know or get your advice, which we'll talk about later. Should this couple reconcile? Can they make it work? And what do they stand to do? Because I know that there's probably a lot of relationships out there as well that's probably been through something very similar. So stick around and we'll also love to hear from you.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back. This is your Tuesday and we delve into some relationship topics this morning. Joining us once again to take a look at what you have said on the socials is mental health counsellor Danelle Meyer. We're going to get into it in just a bit. But just to run you through, if you've just joined us, we had a little scenario of a couple and the gentleman was facing some substance abuse and he was going through all of that, which then of course there was infidelity on the partner's side as well. And we unpacked that a little bit, but we wanted to know from you, substance abuse and infidelity, how does that play and what advice do you have? Maybe you've gone through something like that similar, but before we do anything else, Zanele, I mean, this is such a big topic. We'll connect with Zanele in just a little bit. She's apparently not ready, but Danelle, lovely to see you again.
Yes, thank you.
We've got a couple of comments on social media, so I want to go through some of them. Tuli, first and foremost, came through and says, you were wrong in your substance abuse dilemma since you left your relationship hanging with no balance. Dealing with a substance abuser is tiring and tormenting because they are out of touch with reality. She was wrong with the infidelity. I'd suggest counseling and therapy for both. If you all can fix it, cool. If at least closure would be found for both parties and you can get rehabilitated. So there's one comment, some good advice coming through as well. We have another one that we want to throw up there as well very quickly, if we can just bring that up. There we have it from Melanie Redlinghuis. Explain to her that you need to first heal yourself and then you can think of marriage counseling. This will show you if she is ready to invest in supporting you and saving the marriage. It's like we said earlier on, you look at these very two big kind of problems, you know, substance abuse, infidelity. Zanele, I know we're connecting with you right now. What is your take on this in terms of substance abuse leading into infidelity in a relationship and how damaging that can be? What's your take?
Sure. I mean, I think with this specific situation, guys, it really is something that is so fragile. But I will say this. I think that in marriage and in any relationship you get into, you really need to have grace for the other person. So I think that, yes, everybody needs to take accountability, right? In terms of you possibly understanding, yes, that your partner understands that you are in a situation with a substance abuse, but it also sometimes affects them negatively. And, they can sometimes act out and maybe not be the person that you know them to be. So that's why I'm like, maybe just having a little bit of grace for each other and possibly just being able to be in a place where you genuinely want to hear each other out. You want to understand where each person comes from. And this is why I always say, I'm always like, get a mediator in, get someone who's going to come and possibly just allow you guys to communicate the best way that you possibly can, gentlemen.
Absolutely. Thanks, Anela. I mean, having grace in a relationship, it is absolutely fundamental. I think the only problem is because we are talking about it being so layered is like, how long can you sustain that grace if maybe one party, really is not willing to really help themselves or better themselves? How long can you keep that grace before things start spilling over and then you're really sitting with a dilemma, right?
100%. And that's why I'm like, the person, unfortunately, who was on the receiving end of the infidelity, I think that you definitely need to possibly understand what was going on with the other person, where it could have been a storm that was happening for them inside, where it was really difficult and they were trying to support you in it. But I think that there is always somewhere, somehow, a place where you can try and understand the person that you love. Because that's what it's about, right? You got to be able to put yourself in that position where you genuinely want to be able to know where someone was coming from. So I am 100% with you, my Ewan.
Absolutely. Thanks, Danielle. Appreciate that. Danielle, I've got a WhatsApp here that I want to read to you, and it says, I want to be anonymous. What you are discussing is my life. I ended up reaching to another male, but it was only an emotional attachment. He gave me the conversation and attention lacking. This happened after 15 years of marriage. My spouse accused me of having been sexually intimate with this person, which wasn't true. What to do? And he refuses to go for counseling. So here we have a rather tricky situation. Yes, there was an emotional infidelity part, no physical. Partner doesn't want to believe it, but obviously, like she said, partner's the same story, substance abuse and so forth and so on, but he refuses to go to counseling. What do this particular couple stand to do?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, it's such a layered conversation, and I think I want to touch on some of the comments and just the opinion that was made earlier about, the grace and how do we go about fixing it. I think there's a fine line between extending grace and having, that healthy boundaries and setting boundaries within the relationship, especially in a situation like this. And when it comes to this, 15 years of marriage, struggling with a partner who's going through addiction and substance abuse, as I mentioned, you can then on the other side experience that lack of emotional connection, and you look for that emotional intimacy somewhere else. And I think the overarching picture here is not to mainly focus on the blame game, but rather look at what are the unhealthy underlying currents of the relationship and how do we exchange that for healthier lifestyle choices. And most times, someone that's in recovery or battling with substance, they might be reluctant to go to rehab, to go for counseling. And this is where it's so important that you establish a good support network of people that can encourage you to go and seek that professional help. But also know that, rightfully so, both parties have to have that willingness and want to invest in change.
Look,
as well.
Yeah, and this is why it's a very tricky scenario, because at the end of the day, I mean, you really have to take ownership of what it is that you are dealing with before pointing a finger at somebody else. You really, and I mean, when I say take ownership, you need to really go and dig deep. You cannot offload what you are going through fully on your partner.
No.
Because that in itself is very damaging to a relationship.
Absolutely.
You need to be willing to step out of that, and then once you have your side clear, then you can start those conversations. Okay, but this affected this somehow. This is why you did something. I think there will be a level of understanding that they can come to.
Absolutely. It's one of those two wrongs don't make it right.
Exactly.
Let's kind of look at what am I going through, what is my internal dialogue with this situation, work through that individually, and then as one of the comments mentioned, seek that marital counseling, seek counseling as a couple, but definitely also address those individual, emotional traumas that you experience while going through this challenge in the relationship, in the marriage.
Yeah, I think it really becomes apparent out of this dilemma in terms of what two wrongs don't make a right, but that taking ownership of your own, deficit, if I can call it like that. That is the key. That is where you start.
Yeah, I think taking accountability shows that, look, I am willing, I'm here, I'm present, I'm willing to invest.
Yeah, and I understand what my actions put out in the world. And let alone on your partner. This is a big one, guys. Danielle, thank you very much for your insight, and I really hope that some of you got some answers out of this discussion as well. It really is a tricky one, but hey, that is why we are here with the experts on a Tuesday chatting about relationships. What is very good for a relationship is a romantic weekend away at a luxury lodge in the mountains.